Accidentally, my maid came into my bedroom at night. She was shocked when she saw me like that. David was 34 years old and worked as a software developer in the city. His life had changed completely 6 months ago when his marriage ended. The divorce wasn't bitter, but it left him feeling lost and alone in his apartment. The place was a mess most of the time. Empty coffee cups sat on tables for days, dust gathered on shelves, and his clothes piled up in corners. He tried to keep up with cleaning, but between his demanding job and the emotional weight he carried, he just couldn't manage it all. But one day his colleagues suggested hiring someone to help with the housework. David hesitated at first. Having a stranger in his personal space felt uncomfortable. But after tripping over a pile of unwashed laundry for the third time that week, he finally agreed it was time to get help. That's when he met Mrs. Chen. She was a woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and a warm smile. She had moved to the country 2 years ago and was still adjusting to everything. Her English wasn't perfect, but she communicated well enough. During their first meeting, she explained that she needed this job to support her family back home. Her husband had passed away and she was the sole provider for her 3 children. The oldest was in college and the younger 2 were still in school. David liked her immediately. There was something genuine about her, something honest. She didn't judge the state of his apartment or ask uncomfortable questions about why a man his age lived alone in such a messy place. She just smiled, nodded, and said she could start the following week. Mrs. Chen came to work 3 times a week, always arriving at 9 in the morning and leaving by 2 in the afternoon. She was incredibly thorough. Within the first month, David's apartment transformed. The windows sparkled, the floors gleamed, and everything had its proper place. But more than that, she brought a sense of warmth to the space. Sometimes he would come home to find small touches, like fresh flowers in a vase or his favorite coffee mug placed ready by the coffee maker. David made sure to treat her well. He always paid on time and even added a little extra during holidays. He left thank you notes on the kitchen counter, telling her how much he appreciated her hard work. Mrs. Chen would smile when she found these notes, carefully folding them and keeping them in her purse. As weeks turned into months, a comfortable routine developed. David would usually leave for work before Mrs. Chen arrived, and she would be gone by the time he returned home. They rarely saw each other, communicating mostly through notes and text messages, but there was a mutual respect between them that made the arrangement work perfectly. David's job was stressful. He worked for a tech company that managed systems for several major clients. Sometimes everything ran smoothly, but other times problems would arise that needed immediate attention. He was part of the emergency response team, which meant he could be called at any hour of the day or night. One particular Tuesday evening, David was relaxing at home, watching a movie and trying to unwind from a long day. His phone rang at 11:30. It was his boss. One of their biggest clients had experienced a complete system failure. Everything was down. Customers couldn't access their accounts. Transactions were frozen, and panic was spreading. David needed to fix it immediately. He rushed to his computer and started working. Lines of code filled his screen as he desperately searched for the problem. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. His eyes burned from staring at the bright screen in his dark bedroom. His back ached from sitting hunched over his laptop. Coffee cups multiplied on his nightstand as he tried to stay alert. Finally, at 4:30 in the morning, he found the issue and fixed it. The system came back online, banned. Relief washed over him, but it was immediately replaced by exhaustion. He was so tired he could barely think straight. He sent a quick message to his boss confirming everything was working, then closed his laptop. David meant to change into pajamas and brush his teeth. He really did. But the moment his head touched the pillow, still in his work clothes, consciousness slipped away. Papers from his troubleshooting were scattered across the bed. His laptop sat beside him, still warm. One arm hung off the side of the mattress, and his mouth was slightly open as he breathed deeply, finally at peace after the stressful night. What David didn't know was that Mrs. Chen had mixed up her schedule. She thought Thursday was Wednesday and planned to come a day early, but she had written it wrong in her calendar and didn't realize her mistake. She had her spare key, the one David had given her months ago so she could let herself in when he had early morning meetings. She thought she was doing the right thing by coming when she was supposed to. Mrs. Chen arrived at 7 in the morning, earlier than her usual 9 o'clock start time. She had a doctor's appointment later that day, so she wanted to finish her work quickly. She unlocked the door quietly, not wanting to disturb anyone in the building. The apartment was silent. David's shoes were by the door, but that wasn't unusual. Sometimes he forgot to put them away. She set down her cleaning supplies and started in the kitchen. The sink had a few dishes from the previous evening, and the counter needed wiping. She worked efficiently, her movements practiced and sure. After finishing the kitchen, she moved to the living room, dusting shelves and vacuuming the carpet. Then she headed toward the bedrooms. David's door was slightly open, which was odd. Usually when he left for work, he closed it completely. A small worry began to form in her mind. What if something was wrong? What if he needed fresh sheets, or had left a note for her? Mrs. Chen gently pushed the door open, expecting to find an empty room. Instead, she saw David lying on the bed, completely still. He was fully dressed in his work clothes, which was strange. Papers were everywhere. His laptop was still on the bed beside him. And he wasn't moving at all. Her heart jumped into her throat. She stood frozen in the doorway, staring at him. His face looked pale in the morning light coming through the curtains. She couldn't see his chest rising and falling. Panic flooded through her body. Oh no. Oh no. Was he breathing? Was he okay? Mrs. Chen had seen death before. Her husband had died suddenly, and the memory of finding him was something that haunted her still. Now, looking at David lying so still, that terrible memory came rushing back. She felt dizzy, her hands shaking. She wanted to run, to call for help, but her feet moved forward instead. She had to check. She had to know if he was all right. Her first aid training from years ago came back to her. Bed. Check for breathing. Check for a pulse. She approached the bed slowly, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. His name came out as a whisper at first, then louder. But David didn't respond. He just lay there, motionless. Mrs. Chen reached out with a trembling hand, moving toward his wrist to check for a pulse. Her fingers were cold with fear as they touched his skin. Ah! The moment she made contact, everything exploded into chaos. David's eyes shot open and he jerked upward with a loud yell, completely disoriented and confused. The sudden movement terrified Mrs. Chen. She screamed and stumbled backward, her arms flailing. Her elbow hit the bedside lamp, sending it crashing to the floor with a loud bang. For several seconds, they both just stared at each other, breathing hard. David's heart was racing. He had been deep in dreamless sleep, exhausted from his night of work, and suddenly he was awake with someone in his room. His first confused thought was that someone had broken in. Mrs. Walls. Chen stood by the door, one hand over her heart, tears starting to form in her eyes. She was shaking all over. David blinked several times, trying to make sense of what was happening. Why was Mrs. Chen in his bedroom? What day was it? Breath. What time was it? Then he looked at his clock. 7:15 in the morning. She wasn't supposed to be here until tomorrow. Or was it today? His tired brain struggled to piece together what had happened. Bah. Mrs. Chen started apologizing rapidly, her words tumbling out in a mix of English and her native language. She kept saying sorry over and over, gesturing toward him, and then toward the door. David could see she was genuinely distressed, and he felt terrible for scaring her. He held up his hands, trying to calm her down. His voice was hoarse from sleep as he explained that it was okay, that she hadn't done anything wrong. But the language barrier made things difficult. They were both trying to talk at the same time, both trying to explain, and neither fully understanding the other. David climbed out of bed, being careful not to move too quickly and scare her again. He picked up the fallen lamp, grateful it hadn't broken. Mrs. Chen kept apologizing, backing toward the door. Breath. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Finally, they both stopped talking. The silence was heavy and awkward. David ran his hand through his messy hair, trying to think clearly despite his exhaustion. Mrs. Chen clutched her cleaning cloth like a lifeline, her eyes still wide with worry. The next few minutes were uncomfortable for both of them. David tried to explain about the system failure at work and how he had been up all night fixing it. Mrs. Chen nodded, understanding some of it but not all. She explained, using simple words and hand gestures, that she had mixed up her days and thought today was her scheduled day to clean. David assured her again that she had done nothing wrong. In fact, he said, he was grateful she had checked on him. If something had actually been wrong, her quick thinking could have saved his life. But even as he said these kind words, he could see that Mrs. Chen was still upset. Buck. She quickly gathered her things, saying she would come back another day. David tried to convince her to stay, to at least have some tea and calm down, but she insisted on leaving. Brace. She was too embarrassed, too shaken by what had happened. She apologized 3 more times before hurrying out the door. After she left, David sat on his couch, fully awake now despite his exhaustion. The apartment felt too quiet. But he kept thinking about the look on Mrs. Chen's face, the genuine fear and concern he had seen there. She had really thought he was dead. She had been scared for him, not for herself. Over the next week, things changed between them. But Chen came for her regular cleaning days, but the warmth was gone. She was formal and distant, barely making eye contact with David on the rare occasions they crossed paths. She stopped, leaving little touches around the apartment. No more fresh flowers. Despair. No more thoughtfully placed items. David noticed immediately. He tried to act normal, tried to show her that everything was fine, but Mrs. Chen remained distant. She would arrive exactly at 9, clean efficiently but without her usual care, and leave exactly at 2. The notes he left for her went unacknowledged. He realized that Mrs. Chen was afraid, not of him, but of losing her job. She probably thought she had violated his privacy and that he might let her go. The thought made David sad. He had never considered firing her. She was the best thing that had happened to his household since the divorce. But more than that, he had come to appreciate her as a person, not just as someone who cleaned his apartment. David decided he needed to fix this situation. He couldn't let this awkwardness continue. Chen needed this job, and he needed her help. But more importantly, they had built something like a friendship through their notes and small gestures. He didn't want to lose that. He sat down and wrote her a long letter. Not a note, but a real letter. He explained everything clearly. He told her about his divorce, about how lonely he had been, about how her presence had made his apartment feel like a home again. He apologized for scaring her and thanked her for caring enough to check on him. He made it absolutely clear that he valued her work and her as a person, and that what happened was just an unfortunate misunderstanding. He put the letter in an envelope along with a bonus payment and left it on the kitchen counter where she would find it. Then he added a second note asking if they could talk face-to-face just for a few minutes to clear the air properly. When Mrs. Chen arrived for her next shift, she found the envelope. David had arranged to work from home that morning specifically so he could be there. He waited nervously in the living room, hearing her move around in the kitchen. Minutes passed. He wondered if she was reading the letter, or if she had just put it aside. Then Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway. Her eyes were red, and she was holding the letter in her hand. She looked at David for a long moment, then slowly nodded. Bears. She would talk with him. They sat at the kitchen table, something they had never done before. David made tea, and they sat across from each other. It felt strange at first, formal and uncomfortable, but then David started talking. Really talking. About his life. He told her about his marriage, how it had fallen apart not because of anger or betrayal, but because they had simply grown into different people. He talked about his stressful job, about the nights when he couldn't sleep, about feeling lost. Mrs. Chen listened carefully. Then, slowly, she began to share her own story. She talked about her life before coming to this country, about her husband's death, about the struggle of providing for 3 children alone. She spoke about how hard it was to learn a new language and adapt to a new culture. She told him about her fears of losing work, of not being able to send money home, of failing her children as they talked. Something shifted between them. The formal wall that had existed, the employer and employee relationship, began to crack. They were just 2 people who had both experienced loss and were trying to rebuild their lives. Mrs. Chen admitted that when she saw David lying so still on the bed, she had been transported back to the morning she found her husband. The fear had been overwhelming. She had acted on instinct, checking to make sure David was alive. When he woke up so suddenly, the shock had been too much. David reached across the table and gently touched her hand. He thanked her for caring, for being brave enough to check on him even when she was scared. He told her that her kindness meant more to him than she probably realized. In the 6 months since his divorce, she was one of the few people who had shown genuine concern for his well-being. Mrs. Rasp. Chen smiled then. A real smile, the first one David had seen from her in over a week. She said that she had been so worried about losing this job because David was the only employer who had ever treated her with real respect. Others had paid her less, expected more, or treated her as if she were invisible. David made her feel valued. They talked for over an hour. David learned that Mrs. Chen's oldest child wanted to be a doctor. Her middle child loved mathematics and dreamed of becoming an engineer. Her youngest was artistic and spent hours drawing. Mrs. Chen showed him pictures on her phone, her face glowing with pride as she talked about each child. David found himself making a promise. Bias. He told Mrs. Chen that he would help her build a better client base. He knew other people in his building and through his work who needed reliable housekeeping help. He would recommend her, help her expand her business so she wouldn't have to worry so much about money. Mrs. Chen's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of gratitude. She hadn't expected such kindness. David explained that it was the least he could do for someone who had shown such care for a stranger. From that day forward, their relationship changed. Mrs. Bay. Chen continued to clean David's apartment 3 times a week, but now there was a real friendship between them. She started bringing him food, traditional dishes from her homeland that she cooked in large batches. She would leave containers in his refrigerator with heating instructions written in careful English. David, who had been surviving mostly on takeout and frozen meals, was touched by the gesture. The food was delicious, filled with flavors he had never experienced before. He started looking forward to finding new dishes waiting for him. In return, David helped Mrs. Chen with her English. On days when he worked from home, they would spend 15 or 20 minutes practicing conversation. He corrected her pronunciation gently, taught her new words, and helped her understand confusing grammar rules. Mrs. Chen was a dedicated student, writing down everything in a small notebook she carried. Dave also made good on his promise. He talked to his neighbors, to colleagues at work, to friends in the area. Within 2 months, Mrs. Chen had 4 new regular clients. Her income increased significantly, and the stress lines on her face began to soften. One evening, as Mrs. Sadler, Chen was preparing to leave. She stopped and looked at David seriously. She told him that the morning she found him in his bedroom, the morning that had seemed so terrible at the time, had actually changed her life for the better. If that hadn't happened, they would have remained distant, just employer and employee. They never would have really talked or understood each other. David realized she was right. That awkward, frightening moment had forced them both to be vulnerable, to see each other as real people with real struggles. Sometimes the worst moments led to the best outcomes. Mrs. Chen also started giving David advice about his life. She told him in her straightforward way that he needed to take better care of himself. Working until he collapsed wasn't sustainable. He needed to set boundaries with his job, to make time for rest and for things that brought him joy. But David listened. It had been a long time since anyone had cared enough to worry about his well-being. His ex-wife had stopped caring months before the divorce. His colleagues were supportive but kept their distance. Mrs. Chen was different. She nagged him like a concerned mother, checking to make sure he was eating properly and sleeping enough. As months passed, David made changes in his life. He started setting limits at work, telling his boss that he couldn't always be available for emergency calls. He needed time to recover and live his own life. To his surprise, his boss agreed and even apologized for putting too much pressure on him. David also started taking better care of his apartment, not leaving everything for Mrs. Chen to handle. He washed his dishes promptly, put his clothes away, and kept surfaces clean. Mrs. Chen noticed and praised him for his efforts, treating each small accomplishment like a major victory. In return, David helped Mrs. Bai Chen navigate complicated situations in her new country. He went with her to parent-teacher conferences at her children's school, helping translate and advocate for them. He helped her understand legal documents and medical forms. He connected her with resources she hadn't known existed. But their friendship became something both of them treasured. David's apartment, which had felt like a lonely prison after his divorce, now felt like a home. When Mrs. Chen was there, the space came alive with her humming and the sounds of her efficient work. When she left, the warmth remained. One day, Mrs. Chen told David that her oldest daughter was planning to visit during the summer. She was nervous about it, worried about where her daughter would stay and how they would afford everything. David immediately offered his second bedroom, the one he never used. He insisted it would be no trouble at all. In fact, he would enjoy having the company. Mrs. Chen tried to refuse, saying it was too much, but David wouldn't hear it. He said that she had done so much for him, made his life so much better, and this was a small thing he could do in return. Finally, she agreed, with tears streaming down her face. When summer came, Mrs. Bell wept. Chen's daughter arrived. She was a bright, ambitious young woman who spoke better English than her mother. David enjoyed talking with her about her studies and her dreams. He even helped her explore the city, showing her places he thought she would enjoy. The daughter stayed for 3 weeks. On her last evening, she thanked David privately. She told him that her mother's letters had changed over the past months. Where before they had been filled with worry and stress, now they contained stories about kind David who treated her mother with respect, who helped her build her business, who cared about their family. Her mother was happier than she had been in years. David felt emotional hearing this. He had never thought his simple acts of kindness had meant so much. He told the daughter that her mother had helped him just as much, maybe more. She had shown him that, after loss and loneliness, it was possible to build new connections and find joy again. After the daughter left, life returned to its comfortable routine. But David noticed something had shifted in himself. He was no longer the sad, isolated man who had hired Mrs. Chen a year ago. Thus, he had rediscovered his ability to care about others and to accept care in return. One evening, about 14 months after the bedroom incident, David and Mrs. Chen sat in his kitchen sharing tea and homemade cookies she had brought. They often did this now, spending a few minutes just talking before she went home. Mrs. Chen brought up that morning, laughing about how terrified they had both been. David laughed, too, remembering his confusion and her scream. They joked about it now, calling it the Great Bedroom Disaster. But then Mrs. Discordia nodded, "Do call and every man died." Chen grew serious. She told David that she would never forget that morning, not because it was embarrassing or scary, but because it taught her something important. She said that sometimes God or fate or the universe pushes people together in strange ways. That morning had pushed them past all the barriers that usually kept people apart, the employer and employee roles, the language differences, the cultural gaps. David agreed. He said that being found at his most vulnerable, exhausted and unconscious and messy had somehow freed him. There were no pretenses left after that. Mrs. Chen had seen him at his worst and hadn't judged him. Instead, she had cared. Mrs. Chen smiled and said, "That was what people should do for each other. Care. Look out for one another. Treat each other with dignity and kindness. Life was too hard to go through it alone." David realized that this unlikely friendship with his housekeeper had taught him more about being human than any other relationship in his life. Mrs. By Chen had shown him that genuine connection doesn't depend on shared backgrounds or languages or social status. It depends on mutual respect, on caring enough to see past the surface, on being willing to be vulnerable with another person. Now, when David came home each day, he didn't feel the loneliness that used to suffocate him. His apartment was clean and organized, yes, but more than that, it was filled with small signs of friendship. A vase of flowers, a container of homemade food, a note written in careful English wishing him a good day. And 3 times a week he looked forward to seeing Mrs. B. Chen, to hearing about her children's accomplishments, to sharing stories about his work, to simply being in the presence of someone who cared about his well-being. The bedroom incident, which could have ended in embarrassment and distance, had instead opened a door to genuine human connection. And both of them were grateful for it.